find on our, thank you, Jess. We often find out that there's a quite lively chat column going on once people identify individuals, groups, locales across London and elsewhere that they want to contact with. So Derek, lovely to see you, but would you mind turning your camera off if that's okay? That would be really great. Thank you, Derek. Just if people could just put in their name and affiliation, if they're happy to do that in the chat column. Very happy for that chat to go in parallel with our discussions. I'll monitor things as part of the questions as we go through. I think that's everything. I plan to finish on time. If we finish earlier, because we've answered everything in the plenary, we will finish early and I'll give you a bit of your afternoon. I can't remember if I've said who all the speakers are, but do you want to bring up the slides quickly, Jess? Okay, our running order for today. I feel like I'm a bingo caller, but I don't mean to do that. But hi, once again, for those people who've just joined us, my name is Syed Ahmed. I'm the chair of Community Energy London. And again, my colleague Jess Dunning will be running the session in the back. After a few comments from me about community energy and the scale of community energy activity in London, we'll be joined by Arun Rao from the Greater London Authority, talking about their latest results from their carbon offset survey of London. And Arun will give you a bit of background if you do not know what carbon offset means, because it is quite unique to London, I should say. Then we're delighted that we're joined by 3 local authority colleagues, all of whom are either well experienced in setting up a community energy fund, have recently gone through a fund process and have got some valuable learnings, or in the process of just, kickstarting their fund. And also, we will be launching tomorrow a revised version of our Local Authority Community Energy Fund guidance document, which is something that Community Energy London worked with Islington to publish a couple of years ago, and we're just in the process of updating it, and it will go on live on our website tomorrow. If there's nothing else to stop me from starting, I might as well start. Jess, do you mind doing the slides, please? Great. Great, yeah. So for colleagues here who aren't familiar with Community Energy London or what community energy groups do, we established as an organisation in 2017. Around a number of groups were already active in the capital, working on developing local, largely energy generation projects, but also energy efficiency projects as well. Many of the groups were motivated to start at the kickstart of the last decade, 2010, when the feed-in tariffs came in. If lots of commercial organisations were actually using the feed-in tariffs to develop, solar-based projects, many community groups thought, well, why can't we do it as well? So, as that slide indicates, that's one of our member organisations based around Muswell and Haringey, N10 Energy, and they've put solar panels on the roof of a school there. They're there with their local MP, Catherine West for Hornsey. And as it says the slide there, community used to describe a project where a group of people come together to design a project and manage it that is there to either generate clean energy, save energy efficiency, provide energy efficiency advice, and so on. And it's more than just about reducing emissions. It's about connecting people to issues around energy and climate. It's about addressing issues around fuel poverty, which is something which has become, not surprisingly, to the fore over the last 12 months. And importantly, it's about liaising with local businesses, local authorities, local organisations to keep that investment in the local community and drive local business into developing these projects. Slide, please, Jess. How can community energy groups help? Well, first of all, as I said, we've got around about 30 groups across the capital. There's a whole bunch of logos there. They're spread pretty much over most of the London boroughs. We're a bit weak in East London, but we're looking to help rectify that by working with local authorities and local groups there. But we've got a very active series of groups in North, South, and also West London as well. And what can the groups provide? Well, increasingly they've been really, they never stop surprising me on the level of ambition and technical knowledge they know in developing projects. And that's been, as I said, originally from PVs, but increasingly we're seeing things like LEDs, heat pumps, control systems, energy advice is something that many groups are getting themselves qualified into. Equally, one of the things that we like to impress upon local authorities is that community benefit organisations, such as many of these community energy groups are, can access funding which local authorities and public sector organisations cannot. So working in collaboration with local authorities, they can actually identify pockets of money which they can bring into the borough. Increasingly, we're seeing more and more other organisations which sit outside of community energy but are interested in everything from, vulnerable households, housing issues, green issues, green spaces, and so on, who want to find out more about how to kickstart their own community energy project. And so we've been working, particularly in the last couple of months, we're in POW, places of worship there, that in this particular instance, and faith groups. We had an event only a week ago with the Diocese of London and the Diocese of Southwark, and we're going to be building upon that work with faith groups, broader faith groups across all faiths in 2023. So if you'd like to know more about that, do drop an email to my colleague Jess. She'll put her email address in the chat column shortly. Next slide, please. We have a map on our website, and it indicates that we have close to, I think, well, it says over 100. It's not far shy of 150 projects all across the capital. If you go to communityenergy.london, you can find the map there. And if you click on any of those kind of blobs there, it will tell you about what the project is, who developed it, what scale of project is, a link to any case study if there is one of them. And also there are filters there, so you can identify the project by the local council, by the ward, and the parliamentary constituency. We've been helped, many of these projects have been stimulated by the Mayor's London Community Energy Fund. That was a particular initiative that Community Energy London worked with the Greater London Authority. It started off in 2017, and we're pleased to say we've gone through 5 rounds of funding, which have helped stimulate close to 150 projects. And we're really delighted that we're hearing that round 6 should hopefully go live next week. In total, that's brought in over £1.5 million to projects. But one of the key things we really like to point out is that the feasibility funding for many of these projects, when they go ahead, when they are feasible, the groups then go to raise funding from the local community via share offers, community share offers. And we tend to find that the feasibility funding, let's say about £15,000 to £20,000, helps liberate something between £60,000, £70,000, £80,000 in capital funding for a project. We're going to present more results on those numbers in our annual report in the first quarter of next year. But just to mention to colleagues here, for providing modest amounts of funding for groups, what you can do is unlock further funding from the local community through these community share offers. And so we're here to talk about community energy funds and what some of the learning is of operating a fund from the 3 councils that we mentioned. Just to say, as at the end of this year, we're seeing community energy funds across Camden, Hackney, Haringey, Hounslow, Islington, Lewisham and Southwark. In addition to those council funds and the GLA's London Community Energy Fund, we're pleased to see that the local distribution network operator for London, or at least the majority of London, UKPN, also has its community energy programme and its Power Partners funding pot of money as well, which is something that we liaise quite closely with UKPN and hope to do more so since their business plan has just been published on November the 30th of the next 5-year price period. Thanks, Jess. I wanted to turn to something which is reflects some work that we've been doing over the last 6 months. And what we really wanted to do is provide a tool for community energy groups and other interested parties on what the potential for community energy in London is. And so we have typical building types that community groups with places of worship I mentioned, but also community centres, leisure centres, some housing projects, GP surgeries, and a variety of other kind of buildings across the capital. So for those buildings, what would be the potential in London? How many of those buildings are there? That's surprisingly a non-trivial question to answer. But one of the things that we turn to in the first instance are some really good tools on the GLA website, which provide individual building by building energy data kind of points. So if you're not familiar with them, you can Google all of these, but there's the London Solar Opportunity Map, which was produced by, I think a satellite, a LiDAR, if you know what that is, I've forgotten what it is, but a LiDAR survey of London's buildings with an estimate undertaken by UCL of the solar potential per building. You can go into the GLA and look at that. The London heat map, which is in the bottom right of that slide, which gives you an indication of the heat consumption of buildings in London, and the London building stock model, which provides a handy route for finding the EPC, or for community buildings, a DEC, a display energy certificate for buildings in London, and also interpolates between neighbouring buildings for a building which doesn't have a certificate to give an indication of what the energy consumption of that building is. Those three tools have been on the GLA website for a while. As powerful as they are, I hope the GLA don't mind us saying they are not the most user-friendly, and they're all separate. They require an awful lot of legwork of you individually finding buildings. Their search functions are not as desirable as they could be. So we've been trying for a year and a half to kind of work with colleagues at the GLA and kind of ease our way into getting access to some of this data. Slide, please, Jess. And part of the reason we want to get that data is a couple of things. We want to accelerate the deployment of projects in the capital by helping groups find the solar potential of buildings that are near them, so they can start those conversations with those building operators. Also look to see how they can group projects together. Is there a type of building where they can see in their area, they can group together to kind of build bigger projects all in one go? Also, Community Energy London is the voice of community energy in the capital. What we want to do is speak to policymakers and other wider stakeholders about what the potential of community energy is. So we want those people, councillors, officers, local MPs, and so on, understand community energy in their ward or their parliamentary constituency. This map allows us to do that. It will also give us an indication of what the complete potential is for different building types across London. And also importantly, in contrast to the GLA tools, we've got an ability for community energy groups and others to download the bits of data. Slide, please. Now, really what we should be doing is doing a demo of the map. We did one last Thursday with our members, and it's all ready, and it will hopefully go live. I'm just looking for a text from my colleague in the next day or two. And we will send a link out to the map to colleagues here. But what it does allow you to do, as I mentioned, is it allows you to do a full search via postcode or road or building name. It allows you to mouse over each building and then find out what the heat consumption is, a link to the DEC, and an idea of the solar potential of that building as well. It also provides within a ward or a parliamentary constituency, the top 10 buildings. In total, we have something like 15,000 community buildings. Their CAL, Community Arts and Leisure, is how we've grouped them. And we've used merged data from UK power networks and their distributed future energy scenarios data, alongside with the GLA data as well, to help get that data set. I can confidently say, after spending quite a lot of time on many maps, this is hopefully a really, really useful tool for local authorities and community energy groups. And I promise it will go live in the next couple of days, so you can make your own determination about that by playing on it. What we've just done is we've added a kind of user sign-on to get access to the map, and different levels of membership of Community Energy London will allow you to download lots of the data. I say different levels. We've only got one level. It's either a member or a non-member, but we'll explain that more when you get time to play on the map. Slide, please, Jess. That's really it. Maybe go back one slide quickly before we go to Liz. Just to say, the map is the first in a series of initiatives we're going to be undertaking early on in 2023. That map will be accompanied by a report that we'll be hoping to launch in the House of Commons in early January, talking about the full potential and vision for community energy up to 2030. We'd be delighted to invite people to that event when we've just got the date sorted, and we're doing that in partnership with a newly formed all-party parliamentary group for community energy. Jess, do you mind taking down the slides for a minute? I couldn't, you probably couldn't see the chat column and I couldn't. So as Jess says that she will circulate the slides after this event. It's great to see we've got people linking down who they are. Any immediate questions for myself? If there's not, I will then happily turn off my camera and pass you over into the capable hands of Arun Rao from the Greater London Authority. Arun, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Syed. Yeah, so I will be just presenting, as I mentioned, on the carbon offset survey report. But as a brief intro to myself, so my name's Arun. I'm in the environment team within the GLA, specifically the climate mitigation team, and I lead on building energy sustainability policies within the London Plan. So that essentially involves leading a technical team that is there to ensure that all the referable developments meet the sustainability policies that are laid out in the London Plan. And that's also within the wider aim we have of reaching net zero carbon emissions by 2030. So as part of this, I've been working on putting together a report which summarises the outcomes from the carbon offset survey, which I'll briefly describe as we go through. And just to note, the report hasn't been published yet, but we're aiming to get it up by the end of the year. So next slide, please, Jess. So just a brief summary of the agenda. So I'll discuss the kind of wider context of where the carbon offset survey sits, and a brief summary of how it's sort of undertaken. Then I'll go through the key outcomes from the most recent survey, and that will include the total value of the funds that were reported. Then I'll go over some of the additional funding sources that are available to local authorities and that we're sort of keen to promote. And so that's why it's been really great to be invited today. I'll kind of briefly touch upon some of the projects that have been funded or reported to be funded, and then I'll quickly talk through some conclusions and recommendations. Next slide, please, Jess. So I'm assuming most people will be aware, just in case not, I'll just do a brief summary on the London Plan. So it's essentially a spatial development strategy for the whole Greater London area and sets out a framework for how London, or how the Mayor sees London developing over the next 25 years. And that's now within the aims of the 2030 net zero carbon target. The aim is for the policies in the plan to inform decisions on planning applications across the city. And we also sort of aim for borough local plans to be in general conformity with this. And that's just to ensure that the whole planning system across the city is joined up, so that there's not any clashes or kind of misalignment between local plans and the London Plan itself. The key areas that are covered are listed on the left-hand side in the kind of purpley brown box, and the carbon offset survey and the policies that I lead on are within the sustainable infrastructure section. And so this essentially sets out the minimum CO2 reduction targets we have for developments, and that also lays out what we expect from energy strategies that are applied or sent into with planning applications. It also includes the carbon offset survey stuff, as I'll discuss shortly, and there's also details around the whole life cycle CO2 emissions reporting, which was newly included. Next slide, please. So essentially how we would like applicants to approach energy strategies when submitting planning applications is mostly through this energy hierarchy, which is highlighted here. And the aim here is really to set the priorities of how we see developments, or how we think developments should be being built. So then it's named here as Be Lean, Be Clean, and Be Green. And essentially what that does is it sets energy efficiency as the biggest priority. So that's essentially hoping or ensuring that new buildings are designed as efficiently as possible to minimize the amount of energy that they need to use. Then after that, it's ensuring that the energy that is supplied is as clean as possible. And then on top of that, it's Be Green, where we want to maximize the amount of renewable energy that is installed. And so we have minimum on-site CO2 reduction targets within the London plan. At the moment, that's 35% beyond the national building regulations. And we have an overall target of net zero for all developments. So what that means is that any developments which aren't designing in net zero on site will then make up the required emission shortfall through offset. So that's essentially a payment that's made to the local authority, and carbon is priced at a specific price, which is set by the local authority, and then so the applicant will pay however much is required to make that development net zero. Ideally, we'd like to see developments design in as close as possible to net zero, so that's why offsetting is sort of at the bottom of the hierarchy there. But that said, offset funds do provide a lot of flexibility, or they're there to provide a flexibility for applicants, because we understand that reaching net zero on site is quite challenging. So the funds are collected by local authorities and they're ring-fenced for carbon reduction projects specifically. And so it's really important that these funds are used in that way, so that local authorities can respond as they see fit to the climate emergency. And the funds are used essentially to unlock carbon savings, well, they can be used to unlock carbon savings within existing building stock through energy efficiency programs, retrofit measures, and installing renewable energy as well. And essentially, we understand that technologies at this stage might be quite challenging to reach net zero, so that's why we have the offset policy in place. And there's further guidance on the website, both for energy strategies specifically, but then also for carbon offsets. Next slide, please. So the survey is essentially a kind of a Google form that we send around to local authorities every year. This one was conducted towards the end of last year and early this year. It's issued annually, and local authorities are required to respond to this. And essentially that's been going on for the last, I think, so like since 2016, what's that, about 6 years. And so we're able to track how the policy has been going over that time. And this is just like a list of everyone that is included in that survey. And yeah, the reason we do this is just so that we can monitor how the policy is being implemented, how LPAs, how local authorities are spending the money, and the sort of the savings that are being achieved through that. Next slide, please. And so some of the key outcomes that came out this year. So overall, since 2016, through the policy, we've realised around £145 million. So that's across all of London, and that's to support local activities to tackle climate change. Of this, around 55 million was collected or secured for collection since the 2020 survey. And the expenditure of the funds itself has increased to almost 20 million, which is again is an increase on the previous year. Next slide, please. On top of that, we had over 90% of local authorities report an increase in the amount they're able to collect or secure for collection since 2020. Around 2/3 of local authorities have begun spending the funds compared to just over half in the year before, and 13 local authorities reported combining these payments with other sources of funding to essentially bolster the amount of money they have, and that's supposed to say 2020, almost double the number in the previous year. So what we've seen here really is a really positive response to the recommendations we had in the year before, and a real increase in the collection and spending of funds, which is really great, especially considering, although 2020 would have also been a pandemic year, it still would have been very challenging in 2021. So it's really good to see those outcomes. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, we had an additional 55 million of payments collected since 2020, and that's around a 60% increase. Just to note that I think partly this is due to the zero carbon homes policy that, sort of as I alluded to, that London took on once the national government dropped it in 2016, or they dropped it in 2015 and London adopted it in 2016. And as of 21, this zero carbon target applies to non-residential developments as well. So all major referable developments now are required to meet this net zero target. And that obviously, as I mentioned, will require further payments to meet up the shortfall from the on-site achievements. Next slide, please. And so just as a summary of what can happen with those funds. So there can be a time lag between when a project is going through planning and accepted and when the payments actually come through. And this will depend on a number of factors. So different local authorities will have different requirements of when the funds should be paid and when they collect them. The number of planning applications in the local authority obviously will have an impact. As also mentioned, the carbon offset price can vary, so this will also have an impact on how much is collected. And also it depends on the actual developments themselves. So those which have a bigger shortfall to net zero will be required to pay more. And different local authorities collect the payments at different stages. So it could be at planning approval stage, it could be once developments have started on site, or it could be once the development is finished. Developers generally are required 3 years to have commenced construction 3 years after planning approval. So again, that feeds into the time lag. Next slide, please. So in terms of additional funding sources, as mentioned, we're very keen for local authorities to make use of everything that's available. And so there's a list here that's obviously also provided in the report. It was really positive to see that 28 local authorities reported that they're supportive of co-funding, and 13 reported that this is already happening. Again, increases on the previous year. And so we're just really keen for this to continue moving forward. Some of the responses we had were that the funds they had weren't enough to well, first of all, some said they weren't enough to provide resources to even find projects or find additional sources of funding, and then others just said they didn't have enough to make any use of smaller projects. So we're really keen to kind of mitigate that and share as many of the different opportunities that are available. And we're also keen for local authorities to work together and pool their funds, because that could also be another way of ensuring that projects go forward. Next slide, please. Just in terms of a brief overview of the kind of projects that were reported to have been funded, as you can see, like energy efficiency and renewable energy projects were the kind of biggest sort of slice of the pie, so the most popular, and that's something that we would kind of really promote. Generally, we see those measures as being the most targeted at reducing both both carbon emissions, but also and with energy prices as high as they are, it also means that you can bring down bills and just ensure that building is developing as efficiently as possible. And also this was conducted by, last year, so this is before the massive hike in energy prices we've seen. So it's really good that this is happening and really baking in the savings that can be seen. There are also projects around behaviour change and greening projects, which was interesting to see, and some local authorities reported some transport related projects. And generally we saw that these were being implemented, while the energy efficiency improvements were being implemented in public buildings and schools and other building stock that were owned by the local authority. Next slide, please. Yep, so in terms of the conclusions, as I sort of mentioned at the beginning, there was some real considerable progress in the offset funds being collected and managed effectively. Big increases in the amount collected and the spending as well, which was really great. And essentially, we just saw a real scaling up of activity across the board in nearly all measures, and that was really positive. And we just want to see that continue. Next slide, please. And finally, in the recommendations, nothing really out of the ordinary here. It's just sort of reiterating some of the strong performance we've seen. So just to ensure that the London Plan minimum targets are maintained, and as I said at the beginning, that's something that is really key. But where the net zero target isn't being met on site, then we really want to see consistent collection of offset payments. As also mentioned, really keen for other opportunities for pooling funds and using other funding sources to be investigated and move forward, because that's a really strong opportunity there to really expand on the projects that have been going forward. Also, some local authorities reported that there were some resourcing barriers, so the funds can definitely be used to overcome that as well. We're really keen that all local authorities continue to monitor the operation of the funds and continue to respond to the survey and report on how this is going. And also, we're really keen for verification methods to be put in place, so to really understand what kind of savings are being achieved post-installation. And making sure that the carbon savings that have been designed in are actually being achieved. As mentioned, it's really good to focus these funds on energy efficiency measures, climate resilience, which is becoming more and more important, renewable energy and district heat network projects as well, and also keen for all the funding expenditure to align with any of the local priorities set in the climate action plans. And that's everything from me, so happy to take any questions.
Thanks, Aaron. That's really an awful lot. Oh, I'm going to just turn my camera on. If my yes, an awful lot in there. So just to say, this is my camera turning on? Oh, it's deciding not to turn on. Well, I'll see if I can boost it.
Blank screen, I'm afraid, Syed.
Oh, there we are.
There we
That's
are.
better. That's better. Aaron, there's an awful lot in there. Thank you for running through that. That's an awful lot of work. So just to give people an idea as well, this is a survey the GLA undertakes the best part of every year, correct, of all the local planning authorities in London. As you indicated, 32 boroughs, the City of London, and those 2 other planning authorities around those regeneration areas in London as well. One of the things you didn't mention, or if you did, forgive me, is that the oversight of the funds. Have you had any kind of review of how the funds, what institutions and governance arrangements are set up with those planning authorities to see how the money is actually allocated to projects, what the decision-making process is?
So we don't oversee that directly, but that was responded to, that did come through in some of the responses. So some local authorities hadn't set up governance arrangements yet because of funds not being big enough, or they just hadn't got round to understanding how they're going to spend the funds. And generally, we've been promoting the fact that those arrangements need to be in place before any sort of planning is going around for the funding. And we're also encouraging local authorities to speak to other local authorities that have already set up the arrangements, because that's the easiest way to learn. And if there's any sort of knowledge gaps, that's the best way of getting through it. But generally, I think it was only a handful that didn't have any arrangements in place. So mostly they're being set up and going forward. But no, yeah, we don't have any direct sort of insight into that. We leave that up to the local authorities.
Question from Vicky Kwasinski in the chat column. You mentioned resource barriers. Does resource, I think I know the answer to this, but I'm interested in your own answer. Does resource barriers include extra people?
Yes, so that was sort of the things that were mentioned, that they didn't have anyone on hand to have the time to go through this. And we do recommend, I don't think we have any specific stipulation how much can be spent on resourcing, but we've sort of recommended around 10% can be used for that. So it shouldn't be something that should be seen as something that isn't sort of relevant or allowed in the funding.
That's right, because I think from memory, the idea behind the offset funds is capital funding, but equally, if you don't have anybody to actually design the projects and set them out, there is that caveat in the guidance that allows up to 10%. So that's something I do alert local authorities to, because it's a bit of the offset guidance, the paragraph that they kind of often miss. You've mentioned as well from the London plan has extended the offset fund requirement from residential to non-residential. Have you seen that spike? I mean, clearly we saw an increase, but how much more came through as a consequence of the new London plan extension? Is there a rough percentage you've seen already, or has that not featured in the offset funds as yet?
Yeah, the breakdown is not something I have off the top of my head, but also it's worth mentioning that probably that would, if there is a spike, that would come through maybe in the next survey, because this would have been, the survey would have completed beginning of this year for projects funded. Yeah, so I guess it would have actually, maybe it takes a bit of time for that data to come through. I think it's a bit complex as well, because a lot of the developments are mixed use as well. So how you break that down between resi and non-resi is maybe a bit more tricky. And so it's something we've not looked into. But yeah, definitely interesting to see how the funds go next year, and seeing maybe it's something we could look into a bit further.
One question from a cell member, Dave Powers, actually maybe outside of your work, but I'll throw it over you anyway, Aaron. And it's basically saying for non-referable planning to the GLA, non-referable to the GLA, the energy assessment guidance, so that's the bit of guidance that the GLA publish for developers. It defers to local authorities to decide on demonstrating CO2 performance. So the question is, how can we ensure consistent, and it says they're favourable planning decisions for low carbon technologies like air source heat pumps? So of course, if it's a smaller scheme, non-referable, it involves an air source heat pump. How can we get more consistent approach around the planning approvals around, something which is vital? I mean, the mayor talks about 2 million air source heat pumps by 2030 to help put on the net zero trajectory. Any thoughts on that, Aaron?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think obviously we don't see the applications that are non-referable, but we understand that it makes up a huge number of applications across the city. So we're very happy for local authorities to follow the guidance as much as is useful and is applicable, and also do feel free to, if there are energy officers in the local authorities that want more information, do feel free to contact us directly. Often in these cases, it's easier just to go through them individually, or depending on what the application is, discuss that rather than talk more broadly. Because I understand obviously they're going to vary quite a lot, but we're more than happy to understand how we can help. If there's any sort of bits of the guidance that are a bit unclear or just need a bit more explanation on how it could apply to a specific context, then do feel free to contact us, because yeah, we really are aware of the amount of projects that we don't see that are vitally important to reaching the net zero target.
Any favourite projects that you've seen through in terms of your review? You thought, oh, well, bloody hell, that was a really clever idea. Anything that kind of springs to mind, Aaron?
Good question. Nothing springs to the top of my mind, if I'm honest. I've just been deep in trying to get the reports. So we have another energy monitoring report, or another report that we're releasing at the same time, which is the energy monitoring report, which summarises the outcomes of all of the referable developments that we've seen the previous year. So yeah, I'm just really struggling.
That's keeping you busy.
Really
yeah,
trying to get it out, but there are the headline figure from that is that we've reached almost 50% savings on national building regulations across, on average, across all applications, which is again an increase from the year before, and just like really strong performance. So yeah, no individual case studies that I can think of, but there are case studies in both reports. So those are the ones that I should really know about, but I don't. But they're in there.
Okay. Very last question from me, and then I'll just mention something that Vicky mentions in the chat column, which will take us to Liz. But the last thing as well is that we see that policy, that London's planning policy is unique, I think, in the country, but we're also seeing the government taking extremely slow steps for the future housing standards and the future building standards. The introduction of those standards will not dilute the fact that there's still the carbon offset policy in London. Question mark at the end of that. Yeah,
I think sort of as I mentioned, we're really keen to ensure that the savings are built in. So there is an argument to say that maybe the carbon offset price needs to be adjusted as that goes through. I think we'll sort of see how things go. We've just updated our energy assessment guidance in line with the new building regulation changes. So we're going to see how that goes and understand how that's been implemented and being achieved. And then sort of, I think from maybe after a year or so of that, we can sort of take a stock view and see how things are. But as I said, also local authorities are more than welcome to undertake their own analysis and set their own carbon offset prices, which some do. Yeah, but we'll definitely see how things go, and we'll be obviously engaging with government as much as possible to ensure that the future homes and building standards coming up are where they need to be.
Perfect. Okay, and just as a reminder to people, I think the GLA default figure is £92.50 per 95. I beg your pardon, for carbon offset times 20 years.
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah. Okay, Aaron, thank you very much for that. That was really helpful. Really interested in seeing the report, because I think it's as much as policy wonks like me, and I can probably think you as well, Aaron, are interested in this. It's surprisingly how many other people do not know about this really powerful route to drive kind of local energy activity. And in the challenging times we're in energy, it provides a real lifeline for local authorities to actually, develop innovative energy projects in their area. Now, the question from Vicky I referred to is there potential for you, or possibly for other people in the meeting as well, to collect example governance arrangements that people are happy to share? So I kind of throw that out to people here as well. If there are governance documents that you have on your websites, on your local authority websites, if you could be kind enough to maybe pop those in there, or let Vicky know how they can get hold of those, because that's, I think, a very important question. And also I'll throw that over to Liz, because I think our next speaker, Liz Ainslie in Islington, they do also actually have some governance arrangements around their carbon offset fund. That's not exactly what Liz is here to talk about, but I'll throw that challenge out to Liz as well. Aaron, thank you again for your time. Liz, over to you.
Great, thanks very much, Syed. Hi, I'm Liz Ainslie with Islington Council, and sorry, you can go to the next slide, Jess. I don't know why I stuck that in there. We know that we're here to talk about community energy funds. So I'm just here to give you a very brief overview about what we did to set up a community energy fund and some things that you might want to think about. As Syed mentioned, we've done a joint guide a couple of years ago about setting up a fund, and that's being updated and will be with you very shortly. But today's topic is just to really pull out a few of the main points to consider when you're setting up a community energy fund. Some things that we've found have been tricky in the past, or that we've maybe not really thought through, and over the years we've sort of, I hope that we've honed our system a little bit in Islington. We're on round 6 now, so these are just a few things to really think about when you're first starting to set up your fund, or if you're doing another round of an existing fund. Next slide, please. So the first main thing to look at is how much funding you can award, and we get ours from the Carbon Offset Fund from Islington. So you might have a carbon offset fund that you can use. You might have other funding that you could use to set up community projects. It might be associated with another department as well as your energy or sustainability department. So it might be with housing or with your voluntary sector departments. But think about how much funding you have and what you want the lifespan of your energy fund to be. So initially we had some funding and we wanted to do 3 rounds of funding. We then went back to our carbon offset team and asked for some more funding to do another 3 rounds. So we wanted to keep people able to look ahead. So if they're doing a project now, but maybe want to continue doing more on the project in a couple of years' time, they knew that there was a bit of certainty that we might have a bit of funding going forward. But you might have other priorities, and you might only have a small budget. So you might want to just do 1 round of funding. You might want to do 100% of funding. You might want to do match funding is required. You might want to do small, medium, large grants. There's all kinds of different ways to put together your funding. We went ahead with 100% funding for feasibility studies, and 100% for capital projects at the beginning of our fund up to a certain cap. So that way people could do a project in its entirety 100% funded from us, or they might have to get match funding if it's a much bigger project. We sort of tweaked it over the years to have, now we require 50% match funding, but we'll give up to £50,000 so people could do a much larger project if they want to do a whole building retrofit, for example. And think about things like, do you want the funding to be based on the amount of carbon that they're saving, the amount of electricity that they're saving? How are you going to base how you award people, especially if you only have a finite amount of funding and you're only able to give out, say, 4 grants this year? How are you going to award those 4 grants? And what will your criteria be to base that upon? And can an organisation apply more than once in this round? Can they apply more than once overall? If they've received funding once from you, can they not apply again? Just some things to think about, and it really does depend on the size of your funding grant. Next, please, Jess. This is a really important one to me because this will save a lot of heartache of people who are applying to the fund, and that is be very clear about what you consider would be a project or part of a project. So you don't want a group to go through all the hassle to put together a big plan, do the application form, and then say, sorry, we don't fund that. So be very clear. We had a little bit of, in the beginning, lots and lots of grants for requests for grants for doing LED projects. And it was just funding for LED was not really something we wanted to consider, because that's quite an easy thing that you can do in a building as lights fail. We wanted to do much bigger things that would be more beneficial to a building that they wouldn't be able to afford without a grant. So we do allow some LED funding as part of a larger project, but not LED only. Some training can be included, but not just training course. So if you wanted to have your residents go on an energy saving workshop, that's lovely, but it's very difficult to quantify how much carbon will be saved, and it's not really something that you can quantify in a large capacity. How people will take that away from the day. So we really wanted to say no to certain things, but yes to other things. And will you fund just equipment? Will you fund some staff time, some consultancy time? How much time would you consider? Will you consider any extras like printing of materials for a workshop? I just said we don't do workshops, but printing materials around a project, sorry. Setting up a legal agreement for a power purchase agreement. Some contingency funding. Will allow some contingency funding up to a certain percentage, but only it's only paid out if the group comes back to us and says, the costs have gone up on the solar panels that we wanted to order. Can we get the difference now? And then we'll go ahead and do it. So we do realize that sometimes things change, especially with prices increasing now. So we do like to have a bit of contingency funding available just in case. Next, please, Jess. And what information should you ask for in the application? We used to be a little bit spare about what we asked people. So it was kind of basic information about the project. But now what we really like to see is a lot more detail from organizations. So a project plan. So a detailed project plan won't just help us monitor how the project might go, but also help the organization to carry out a successful project. We always ask for 2 quotes at least, and we don't require that the group goes with the lowest quote, but we like to make sure that people have gone out and spoken to lots of contractors who might be able to help them. That way they can kind of see the lay of the land, find a contractor that they like, find a contractor they think will do a good job, see what they think is a reasonable price for the job as well. We never used to ask for permissions, which was a big stupid thing not to do. So nowadays, if you are a leaseholder in a building, we ask that you provide just an email or a letter from your landlord stating that it's okay to go ahead and make changes to the building, because doing it after you've awarded the funding became a bit of a chore, really. And will there need to be planning permission? What we've done in the past is we've given a chunk of money to an organisation, but only allowed them to take the amount of money to get planning permission first. Once the planning permission has been granted, then we give them the remaining amount of funding to carry out the project. Usually that's around solar panels that might face a street or something. But that way, if they don't get planning permission, we're not having to try to claw money back from an organisation that that might still want to go ahead and use it for something else. And just other documents, your insurance documents, a constitution, we require bank account details, that sort of thing. Next, please, Jess. And finally, you'll be glad to know, final, look at your internal processes. So how long will you allow the application window to stay open? How are you going to review those applications? We've put together a small panel in Islington, and we kind of pass it through people in the energy team to review the project, and then we get a couple of councillors involved, a couple of officers involved, and look at the projects as a whole to see if there's any questions we want to go back to the organisation with, or if we think it's a fair project as it is. How will you notify the applicants? How will you pay out the money to the applicants? How will you get feedback from the applicants? And then how will you let the unsuccessful applicants know why they haven't been chosen? And it's good to kind of think about your whole internal process, how long it will take, because it does take quite a lot of officer time to read through all the applications, to speak to the different organisations, and to then go ahead and do the internal paperwork to pay those grants, just to make sure that you've got enough time and the organisations have a realistic timeline of it will be 6 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks, whatever. And just make sure to communicate that to the applicants. I'm doing that now. I'm saying our application window closes on the 6th of January. We should know by 1st of March if you're successful, and we will have let you know. You'll probably receive the money by 1st of April, or the middle of April, depending on how things go. So at least people have some kind of an idea of when they could maybe start a project. And that's it for this, but I have one final slide to say. Next, please. Round 6 is now open for Islington. Hooray! So if you know of anyone in the Islington area who would like to put a community energy project together, please have them get in touch with me. And our applications close 5 p.m. on Friday, the 6th of January. And that's it.
That's wonderful, Liz. God, there's an awful lot of really valuable information packed in those slides. So thank you so much for pulling those together. And clearly your kind of working relationship with community energy groups hasn't scared you away, because you're on round 6.
We love it. It's great. We've got to know a lot of really good community energy groups in the area, in London, and just a lot of organizations who have some really good ideas that just want to do something.
One of the things I think that we've also found is that you've attracted expertise from community energy groups, not physically based in Islington, but what they've done is they've come in and handheld community groups who have an ambition to do a kind of carbon reduction projects. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely, yes. There have been a few organisations, such as Repowering London, who have come and helped other organisations to do things like feasibility studies, and it's a win-win situation, because the local group can ask for some funding to do the more specialised work that they're not able to do, and they can also get some advice from the specialist organisations such as Repowering about how to go forward and what the best process would be.
The link with councillors, do they kind of go and champion this there locally? Are they taking interest in projects once they've got up and about? How does that work?
Yes, we do have quite a few local councillors who have either a project in their ward that they're interested in, or an organisation in their ward that they're interested in. So we let all the councillors know that the fund is open, and to publicise it at their surgeries or in their newsletters, and that way we can sort of spread the word a little bit more. And also sometimes the councillor will get behind a project in the area, just to sort of give it a little bit more, I want to say kudos, but I don't really mean that as a but I suppose more support than anything.
Last thing, I can't see any questions in the chat column, but Liz, hang about for the plenary Q&A at the end. Any favourite project of yours over these 5 rounds prior?
Well, Derek is on the call, and he's got a very interesting project, and I can't wait for it to be finished. So Derek was doing a whole building retrofit with solar and heat pumps and all sorts, and so it will be very interesting when it's all finished.
Perfect. Okay, that's really, really great. And I think an important plea from Community Energy London was just that, if we can make sure that some of these projects, real exemplars, are highlighted somewhere in the Islington website via case studies or something similar, it really provides the impetus for other groups when they talk about what do you mean by community energy, and can you point to an exact project, because that's the best way to stimulate more action. Liz, thank you for that, and thanks for all your help on the guide as well, which, as I mentioned, hopefully will go live tomorrow. Straight to our next speaker, Jason Powell from Hackney. Jason, over to you, sir.
Thanks, Syed. And yeah, Liz, really interesting to hear about what you're up to there. And I'm also glad that we've taken a slightly different approach, mainly because you guys have got so much experience in this, and we're just on round 1. So a little intro to me then, on the first slide, Jess, please. Hackney Light and Power overseeing all of the energy delivery projects in Hackney under that branding. In terms of myself, I came into the council early into the pandemic, leading on the emergency response in public health, a lot of engagement teams and community trusted work. And then I came into this role in September to pick up the Community Energy Fund. It was advertised in June. And this is our first round, and there was a real need to just press ahead and get this moving. So, from learning from the pandemic response, it's better sometimes just to get on with things than strive for absolute perfection. But no doubt there'll be a lot of learnings for future rounds. So we launched on the 1st of November, and in this presentation, I'm going to give a review of my experience and an insight into our approach, primarily for other local authorities who might be looking to launch a fund. Next slide, please, Jess. So I'll speak a little bit about our role as a local authority, how we've adapted the GLA model for Hackney, the scope of our impact and focus areas and working with local knowledge, a little bit about pre-feasibility, and then some ideas around the future of the fund in Hackney. Next slide, please. So I see our role as our local authority really we need to be asking a key question: is what is our role? And I think it's around information, oversight, and operational enabling. So we're a central point for information sharing and stepping in to ensure recipient organisations and energy groups can A, have access to the information they need, but B, more importantly, know who else to work with to develop their plans. So we held a workshop on the 1st of November to launch the programme, and that was the key bit there was to identify groups and advertise the fund, and we were there with the mayor and councillors to really promote that and get the word out. We've got a more focused event next week, which will be on engagement, mainly we're targeting a lot of schools for this, but also other recipient organisations about how their projects can get off the ground and link them back into community groups, and also the engagement element of it. So also on the oversight, we are a local authority. We know where we might want to target. How can we identify potential collaborations in the areas that we might want to do that, or linking groups together? And then, of course, you've got the enabling element of our, our conversations we can have internally. And I'll come on to this in a later slide, but around, property, local authority-owned property and planning, etc. Next slide, please. So largely we decided to replicate the GLA model, and that was because we've had a successful energy group project from the London Community Energy Fund at Stoke Newington School, and there's a photo there with the mayor, and Diane Abbott's come down to look at the work, and everyone was very happy about how that went. So we wanted to replicate that work and try and add in some of Hackney's funding to give us a bit more of we can put our oversight into some of the projects happening, get more off the ground, but we want to keep it as straightforward as possible, and try and replicate the GLA model where we can, and then maybe make amendments for future rounds of the fund. So we've aligned our application deadlines and funding dates roughly in line with the GLA fund. We've made some changes. We are getting this funding through the carbon offset fund. It was great to hear the presentation earlier on that. We've increased the scoring around carbon saving evidence, and then we've also adapted a little bit around addressing cost of living crisis and how projects might be able to address that as part of their bid. And then we've got the application stage open for 3 months, which is quite a long time, but we really wanted to have that window to work with groups and make sure that everyone's had the opportunity to apply, and also work with the groups who want to apply for the fund. And then finally, there's a little bit of due diligence that needs to be put in, because although for the capital stage you can apply for both the GLA fund and the Hackney one, clearly for the feasibility phase of the fund, that wouldn't be great if you've got applications in from both. So just putting some due diligence in place to ensure that they're not attaining funding from both sources. Next slide, please. So leading on from who we are as a local authority and the oversight we have, we've got the ability to encourage application from areas of the borough with high levels of poverty and an increased need for projects that can reduce energy bills, particularly in schools, and help them with their budgets. Written into the applications, it's important that we look into, that we took into account the benefits that the projects will bring to each community, and the positive impacts the fund can bring at a ground level. And we needed to tap into local knowledge and experience to develop those relationships with groups. They can bring a range of different approaches, be it retrofit, solar, or community relations. If there are smaller organisations with specific skills that don't feel capable of completing the bid themselves, they could be partnered in with another local group that can fill the gaps. And similarly, could larger groups benefit by working with smaller groups to strengthen their bids, and use their experience to support a collaborative approach. Just a little note there around managing expectations. There is a fair bit of work that needs to be undertaken just to develop the feasibility bids and get strong applications. So it's important to make the groups aware of that at the start, and that there's no guarantee their application will be successful. However, with close work with us as a local authority and the right support, we'd hope they have a really good chance. Next slide, please. So we've been talking to our education department to see how they can help support messaging, especially in the lead up to workshops, and also trying to have those conversations internally once we've identified the projects that we've been notified of, so that we can just spot any red flags around projects that might be able to not get off the ground, albeit due to planning restrictions or something to do with the education team and things that they might know. Once the fund's been advertised and gone live, we've been reaching out potential bidders with forms of expression of interest to get that information back in. And more generally, it's also a good idea just to promote this internally through even teams like Public Health, their Community Champions program, who might be able to help you with some of that insight into the local communities. Next slide, please. So we'll be keeping a record of the projects that didn't get off the ground, so that we can potentially revisit those for future phases of the fund. If the applicant projects aren't successful, there'll be further opportunities for funding in future rounds. So we'll need to meet with the unsuccessful groups to give the feedback and how we can future develop those plans to maybe be successful in the future. We are looking at our next year's funding now for the Community Energy Fund, and we're hoping to be successful with that early next year. So some of those feasibility projects now may look to be funded by the the future capital stage if they're not quite ready for the first stage of the capital fund. And then there are internal conversations in Hackney happening as well around the future model of this. The community groups are really the trusted people to deliver this work, so we need to have a look at how that model can bring ideas to the table about how it look in the future. Could we help groups with their plans for other funding? Can we identify the other funding they might be able to access through the local authority? Basically, there's a lot of people out there with a lot of passion in this area, so we need to encourage the work that they're doing on the ground and work out how we can best support them. Next slide, please. So this is just a timeline of our fund currently, which is matching up at the moment roughly with what the GLA are doing. Again, there's quite a large window there for applications to be open. We closed them on the 31st of January. So if you know anybody in Hackney that would be interested in this, please do send them our way. Next slide, please, Jess. And here's where you go. So I think this link has been sent around with the emails for this meeting, but you can access the Community Energy Fund information on our website, how to apply, the prospectus, all of the documentation, but also Hackney Light and Power, just a little bit about the other things we work on. We're overseeing the Green Homes programme, solar on all of our schools, commercial buildings, residential properties, and the plans to potentially sell the energy back to residents, electric vehicle charging, and the district heat networks as well, all going to be delivered under this Hackney Light and Power brand. So we're really trying to put a stamp on that and really develop that branding for future projects that we'll do in this space. And yeah, that's it for me. Welcome any questions.
Cheers, Jason. That's absolutely fantastic. Really, really great. Really kind of like a thorough thought process that you've been going through to actually launch the fund. Just to say that I did go to the launch event at Stoke Newton School of that PV project by one of Community Energy London members, Stoke Energy. And I think we've got some colleagues from Stoke Energy possibly on the call as well. Just to say the thing about that, and it was a really lovely event to go to after being locked away under kind of like a lockdown for so long as well. But just to say, that particular school project, one of my lasting memories of that day, it was a lovely sunny day, always great to go and see a large PV installation on a roof on a lovely sunny day when it's pumping out power, is just the amount of debate it generated with Mayor Glanville and other people on the day. I really hope that that project helped stimulate the thinking, which then eventually led to the kind of emergence later on of the Community Energy Fund. So the thing about not only these opportunities for actually enhancing a school, providing investment into the local area, because local companies were used as well in the development of that project, provide educational facilities for the kids about solar and many, many other things which we all know about. But it really is a really powerful talking point for local people to talk about investment in a kind of like loved asset in their area. So, and just the other thing, of course, is it provides that route for behaviour change. Because one of the key things that we're trying to do at Community Energy London is the actual projects are only the starting point for spreading out the kind of wider debate around, what a net zero lifestyle is. We've got a question from Dave Powis. Dave, do you want to come in? There's a lot there, and rather than me kind of be clunky with it, do you want to come in and say that?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I think I'm picking up on what Liz said earlier, and I've spoken to Jason about this as well. I suppose the carbon offset fund by its nature is funded through trying to get to implement zero carbon measures. But there is a huge focus on demonstrating the carbon savings for these projects that community groups are putting in for. And as Liz alluded to earlier, there's not so much funding for purely educational or advocacy or awareness or behavioural changes, which have a huge potential across the community to increase energy efficiency and therefore make those carbon savings. So it feels like I'd like to think that the criteria by which the carbon offset fund is being used could be challenged or amended to try and incorporate some of this more softer, I think it's been described, approach.
Thanks, Dave. I'm glad I brought you in. I would have mangled that up. Jason, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, we have spoken about this, and Dave's been absolutely brilliant throughout the launch so far, and I really hope we get some strong bids in from Heal. But it's also a frustration on our side. So, you know, this isn't something that I've written into the prospectus saying we need to do this. I think that's a good idea. It's more that we've accessed this funding through the carbon offset fund, and my understanding of it is that we need to demonstrate the carbon savings to report that back. But I do wonder if we can bring Arun in on that and get a bit of further clarity, maybe.
Okay, so that's do you have, to what extent do these projects have to match carbon ton by ton? Because I think I have a tendency to believe agree with Dave. And just to say, Jason, the London Community Energy Fund, the Mayor's Fund, we had exactly the same conversations with them, and those softer projects have come through as the fund has evolved over the last 3 to 4 years. So colleagues at the GLA have taken exactly the same route as well. But Arun, any thoughts on, you know, the necessity to match ton for ton, or is there flexibility there?
Yeah, I think I sort of did allude to the fact that we have seen some of the some behavioural change projects being put in, and other things that are kind of less, I guess you could argue are less specifically tangible. Yeah, I suppose I just don't have an answer, a specific answer. I think we shouldn't be beholden to making sure everything is measurable and perfect, because I think as was mentioned, these can have like really long-ranging impacts, and can have sort of co-benefits as well that go beyond maybe a specific project. So I don't think we would. The risk really is that you go down the route of trying to measure something and then kind of water down what you're trying to achieve. So I suppose, yeah, that's just to say, like, I don't think we should be focusing too much on making sure everything is perfectly measurable. As long as like the overall aim is to reduce emissions, and we understand that's happening, then I think that's probably the most important thing. Yeah,
just to jump in there to say, I think the measuring ton for ton is something I'm trying to get people to way to think of. As the grid decarbonises, you need to look at that co-benefit issues as well. You know, where London, I mean, we cannot develop 3 megawatt solar projects in London as much as many community energy projects would do. They can do multiples of lots of small projects, which I would argue at the local distribution grid level bring a whole host of benefits which are not measured in. And as we develop a more smart, flexible system, I think that those projects come into their own as they can flex the system and respond to some of the challenges we're already seeing around national grid, and, you know, kind of whether or not we have blackouts this year. So just to say, I think we need to always have in mind that the fact that we're going to, as we evolve to a smarter system, these assets take on a different value, especially when they're married with storage as well. I can't see any further questions. So Jason, Arun, hang fire, and we're going to bring on our final speaker of the day, who is Ajit Bansal from Hounslow. Ajit, over to you. Really, thank you for coming along today. Really great to see you here.
No worries, thanks, Syed. So my presentation is pretty much going to mirror exactly what Liz has said, and I'll completely echo that. And it's very similar to Jason's in terms of the lessons and the challenges we have had in setting up our fund. I'm Ajit Bansal, and I lead the Climate Emergency Environmental Strategy Service at Hounslow. As I mentioned, I'm going to focus on the Hounslow Community Energy Fund and what we've learned along the way. Next slide, Jess. So the commitment for setting up the community energy fund in our borough really came from a climate emergency action plan and our cabinet members. They declared a climate emergency. We adopted a plan in 2020 and set a net zero carbon emissions target for our own corporate estate, but that only makes up 5% of our borough-wide carbon emissions. So it's a big push to try and get the community involved in helping us to reduce the wider borough emissions. And next slide, Jess. So in October last year, so October 2021, we began exploring opportunities for setting up a community energy fund, attending similar sessions to what we have today, speaking with colleagues from different boroughs across London and the outer areas to really understand how we could set up our fund, what would be involved, and what we should be really focusing on. And essentially, we have now, a year later, we've now come to this. So we've set up our fund essentially to mobilise communities to develop and deliver their energy and carbon reduction projects. And as I mentioned, after a lot of research, we decided that our fund will be open to all constituted groups or organisations operating within our borough. Groups had the opportunity to apply for up to £40,000 worth of funding for their projects that will reduce carbon and save on their energy bills. We launched the pilot in spring and we gave a 3-month window for applications to be submitted. And within that 40,000k band, we had 3 levels for small grants, medium grants and large grants. Next slide, Jess. The specific measures that were eligible for funding included everything from fabric first, such as insulation, triple double glazing, replacement of energy inefficient lighting with LEDs, and ultimately the installation of renewable technologies like solar panels and heat pumps. Getting my words all mixed up. I must stress that these were just the suggested measures that we recommended to our community groups. We were keen to work with the applicants to discuss other projects that they could implement that will achieve carbon emissions reductions and how they could be taken forward. Because ultimately these projects were going to be carried out by the community groups themselves. So they needed to be invested in the work. Just bear with me one. Sorry about that. My daughter had perfect timing coming home from school and interrupting the flow. I'll carry on. Next slide, Jess. Because the funding was being channeled through our carbon offset fund, it's really important to us that all the projects that we had coming forward were able to demonstrate carbon savings. And we essentially left it up to community groups to decide how they demonstrate those savings, because we didn't want to be too prescriptive, particularly at the pilot stage. And those savings could be demonstrated through a bespoke feasibility study, a carbon analysis commissioned by a third party, or through the use of energy monitoring that they had been doing, or energy assessments. We also asked groups to incorporate the wider co-benefits into their project and demonstrate that social value. So it wasn't just solely about the retrofit of their building, it was how they could reach out into the community and embed that behavioural change. Next slide, Jess. As I mentioned, we launched the fund in spring and we had 6 applications come forward from local groups, and these varied in terms of the level of detail that they provided us. But because we were really pleased with the response and the different proposals that came forward, we actively worked with each of the 6 groups to develop their proposals further. And as a result, the timeline we had set ourselves ended up stretching out a bit further because we were doing that further engagement to strengthen the project proposal, obtain quotes from suppliers, because as it was mentioned earlier, in the current climate, it's really difficult to find certified PAS 2035 or MCS accredited contractors to provide quotes. We were also keen to ensure that that social value element was really incorporated before awarding any grants as well. You can see from the screen that 6 community groups have now benefited from the grant, and Cabinet have approved this allocation in October this year. Next slide, Jess. We have learned an incredible number of lessons along on our journey on this pilot phase. And what I will stress is, from the very start, please do start liaising with your community engagement team. This will help you to outreach to a very diverse applicant pool. We used our existing channels, such as the friends of groups, the religious organisations, but in hindsight, we could have gotten more diversity from other groups that could have applied. We have been explicitly promoting the scheme in our community engagement work with different teams and through our cost of living events to drum up interest. So there are other ways. We'd encourage you guys to reach out to different community groups in your boroughs. We would strongly encourage, as Liz mentioned earlier, to engage early with relevant team members from across the council, whether it be planning, building control, finance, because if I'm honest, we didn't realise how complicated some of these projects might get when it comes to building control regulations and planning processes. We are much better prepared for the next round of funding, as we have that good understanding of the feasibility of the different timelines that need to be considered, and particularly from a planning perspective. We also had a couple of applicants that lease buildings from the council. So ideally, we should have had a process already in place to deal with those type of properties, since they were not excluded from applying, but it just took us a little bit longer to make sure we were doing our due diligence with our corporate property team, our management company, and to iron out any agreements that were in place, and update any leases that were required. We allowed 3 months for applicants to put in a bid initially, from the moment applications were opened and the closing date, but we realised we needed more flexibility. As I mentioned, with the retrofit sector, applicants struggled to get the 3 quotes, and this delayed the timelines for when we could evaluate the applications and award the funding. If possible, do utilise an existing grant management system. When we were initially setting up our fund, our colleagues in our Thriving Communities team were in the middle of procuring an online grant management system, but because we were keen to launch our fund, we were not able to align our processes. And so we went with the paper-based copy, which was fine. But I think to speed it up in the future, we will be pushing forward for that grant management system to make it easier for community groups and ourselves to streamline the process. We ran numerous online sessions before the application deadline to promote this fund to applicants, and to enable them, to give them the opportunity to ask questions and talk through their different proposals. We tried to make it more of a drop-in informal type session, but what we found was that applicants prefer to have one-to-ones to discuss their projects in more depth. So those were more preferable, and we were able to offer slots, and we'll probably take that approach going forward. I think that was my last slide, but our funding for this year has closed, and we are hoping to open up another round of funding again in spring next year. If anyone is interested to find out more, please drop us a line on environmental.strategy@hounslow.gov.uk, because I'm pretty sure we could write a book on all the different things we've learned on this journey. Over to you, Syed.
I'd read it. So, you know, do have a think of that, because we're quite clearly seeing from, you know, Liz has got, as we can clearly see, experience on this. 2 quick questions for me. I can't see anything in the chat column. You mentioned we in terms of supporting the groups with some of, I think, some of the technical elements of their application. Yeah. Did you, you know, you saw some information through, did you have some technical people within the council say, oh, let me have a look at their numbers and so on?
Yes, so we brought our energy team on board to help us analyse the proposals, almost do the due diligence on the carbon savings that were being proposed, particularly when it came to, say, insulation measures. I'll put my hands up, I wouldn't know which thickness of insulation is good or bad. So I was relying on my corporate property team to go, right, this is the minimum standard you should have. And
Perfect.
that was really supportive for us.
That's really great. One other thing, there's one question in the chat which I'll come into and say, you mentioned the community engagement team. Okay, where do they sit? Because I must admit, even though I've been working on community energy and community groups, the community engagement team in local authorities has been a bit opaque to me. What am I doing wrong, or what are groups doing wrong? Where do they need to turn to find out this?
So our community engagement team sit within our Assistant Chief Exec's Directorate,
Okay.
under the communities division, and they are solely there to do the outreach into the community, to distribute the Thriving Communities Fund, which is part of our leaders initiative. They've got the insights and knowledge into what is happening on the ground. We hear it from different community groups that they want to go green, but that community engagement team, they are targeting the different faith groups, the community groups that are doing food growing that we don't necessarily speak to on a day-to-day basis.
Absolutely.
So they are able to help us connect the dots.
Yeah.
So we had applicants that were interested in doing a project, didn't have enough information, or wanted to partner up with other applicants or other groups. We were able to work with the community engagement team to connect the two together. And whilst those applications haven't come forward, it has made that connection, and we will are encouraging them to submit their application for later rounds.
Okay, one more question in chat, but could Arun, Jason and Liz join us if they're still there? The question from Emma Sharp to you, Ajit, was your scheme also funded by all council's council's carbon offset fund?
Yes, it was.
Okay, that's nice and clear. Before I open it up, we've got about 5 minutes, so I'll try and keep to time. Is there any question that came up in your mind as you heard any other presentations, guys? Did you kind of hear anything go, oh, that's interesting, haven't thought of that? Or I'm kind of hoping this is you're going to be taking away as a kind of principal kind of actors in this area in community energy. And hopefully it's kind of stimulated some ideas in your mind. And just to say, Ajit, clearly, even though you put what seemed like an awful lot of work in your fund, it hasn't scared you from doing a second round next spring.
No, definitely not, because we had amazing community groups that were incredibly patient and were willing to work with us. We were slightly nervous that they might get put off by our processes, and the fact that we did stress to them it was a pilot, and that we are going to be learning lots of lessons along the way. But by working in a very co-design, co-production kind of way, we've had more of a success, and I'm thankful to those community groups for their patience and perseverance on this journey with us.
A lovely comment by David Esdale of Tower Hamlets in the Econ, and forgive me, David, I wasn't aware of this work going on there, so you know that's a bad on me. But you're referencing there your carbon reduction community grant, so you know they're called different things by slightly different local authorities, but 11 grants, 200k in total. And you've been visiting some of the projects, and there's some information there suggests if we could take note of that. And also, David, if you want to drop us a line nearer the time, we'll be extremely happy to kind of promote your second round next year. That's building on the success of the first. So there you are, Islington on their 6th, you know, Hounslow going to their 2nd, Tower Hamlets going to their 2nd. So Arun, a bit of a plea for you, you know, if you haven't sent your report to the printer, it would be nice to have a paragraph saying, carbon offset funds are being used really imaginatively with community energy groups as well through community energy funds. That wouldn't go amiss in your carbon offset report, since it's not being quite published yet. I was trying to think of any other questions. I've been asking them as I've gone along. Just to say that where there are other local authorities who couldn't join us here today, principally because I've been really badly organised at getting people invited to the event. So we had colleagues from Camden and Haringey, who couldn't make it along today. Haringey are in the second round of their fund. I think Camden in their third or fourth. Southwark, I believe, have yet to start theirs. We have a colleague, I think, from Greenwich online, and Greenwich did theirs and may be looking to revisit their fund shortly as well. I'm kind of slightly flanneling here because there was a question in mind, but I've quite forgotten it. But Ajit, just one more thing. Once you've got these projects, and you mentioned 6, 2 quick things. One, which one was your favourite, if you can say that? And 2, back to the point I made to 1 or 2 of the others about the interest from councillors once the projects are there. Has there been interest to say, actually, we use this facility all the time, but we weren't aware that we were given a grant to reduce their carbon? You know, they're kind of like assets that are often used by the local community, but you're kind of looking at it through a different lens in terms of a carbon reduction project. Any thoughts there, Ajit?
Yes, so we definitely had a lot more interest from councillors, and it's helped by having these applications coming forward. So what we've started doing now is working with community groups who have just an idea. And that's helped by the councillors sending the idea to us, and we were able to now develop that. So when that round, second round is launched, they can quite easily apply for it. So it will help speed up the process. What we've found really useful with the councillors is that we are hoping for a diverse range of applicants this time, and not from the usual community groups that engage with us day in, day out. I absolutely love them, but there's so many more out there.
So many more, that's right, yeah. Absolutely. Listen, we've come to our closing time. I don't want to extend it. I do want to keep our speakers on just for literally 3-4 minutes at the end of the meeting, just on a couple of points that I'd like to take forward with you. But just one tiny anecdote to mention. I don't know if they're online, but one of our members at Community Energy London, SE24 Energy, based in Southeast 24, Southeast London, they were a group of cyclists. You go on cycling tours. Not being a cyclist, I can't quite see the attraction of that, but clearly they did. And so there would be, and about 5 or 6 years ago, many of them were linked to a local church around Camberwell. They kind of thought, well, why don't we look to see the feasibility of solar panels on the roof of the church? They did that. Once they kind of looked at the church, they couldn't get as much capacity as they wanted to do because, you know, the church roof wasn't as strong, but they still got that project eventually over the line. The Community Energy Fund that came out of the sale of the power then went to kind of fund local groups who had, there were various bits of beef going on between like younger people in the area. So they were facilitating kind of conversations with the local groups in Camberwell to come into the church and try to talk out some of their problems before it kind of got into any kind of further kind of like seriousness. That was 5-6 years ago. Rolling on from that cycling group to look at one church, they're on their about 8th project now. And their ambitions have grown and grown and grown. They've attracted more and more people from the local area, many of whom have got professional service skills, many working that sector at the moment, working in the energy sector. They've got people from government as well in there as well. So it's quite interesting how a limited group of people from a cycling perspective and looking at kind of green issues through transport have now been on their 8th, 9th or 10th project. And they've raised money through community share offers and through kind of other kind of like corporate CSR kind of funds as well. So just to say, you know, through the work that you're doing to support the local group, it's really quite amazing where those groups can get to over a period of time. On that note, I'll thank you to all our speakers, to Ajit, Arun, Jason and Liz. Liz especially for helping us with our guidance document, which again should hopefully be online on the Community Energy London website tomorrow. Jess will be emailing out to all attendees where the resource materials from today's event will be, and also a link to that guide. I'm going to just close the meeting now. Thank you again. We look forward to seeing you at more. This is our 5th event in about 3 weeks. Don't think that was a very good idea, but I'm glad we got to our last event. But we'll be doing an awful lot more in 2023. So watch this space. Do join the Community Energy London website. I was going to mention, yes, you're going to do peer mentoring. Can you do 30 seconds quickly, especially for Jason and Liz? Just very quickly. Forgive me, Jess.
That's okay. We did run out of time there. Yes, just to do a quick summary. So we have a series of 8 mentors available. So experienced community energy practitioners from our member groups all across London. And they're available to give 40 sessions, not each altogether, 40 sessions in total. 3.5 hours in length to anybody who applies through our website. So I'll pop a link in the chat in a moment and drop it through to all of your emails as well. But that really is available for any groups who are applying to your own funds or to the London Community Energy Fund to get some additional support. We understand that these can be quite complicated projects, and it's really helpful to speak to somebody who's been there before, who's already put solar up on a school, for example, and might be able to give some input on putting solar up on another building, for example. And they just can give that helping hand and kind of get over any hurdles that groups are facing. So yeah, just check out our website and please do share with anybody that you find is having any problems.
Yeah, do let your community engagement groups know. They're there, those experts. We are paying them for their time. The important thing I've learned early on from Community Energy in London is try to bring in the money as a conduit to the groups to pay for their time, their expertise. Okay, everybody on the call, thank you very much for coming along today. Thanks for your time. Speakers, I promise I won't take more than 2 or 3 minutes of your time afterwards, but for everybody else, thank you again. If I don't see you at another event, I don't think we've got another event, have a good Christmas and festive break all. We'll see you early in 2023 with lots more exciting things around community energy. Thank you again, and Arun, Jason, Liz and Ajit, hang fire just for 2 minutes and we'll just let people